On this episode of the podcast, I have Neil Bhay on with me. He is the CTO of TuneCore. We're going to be talking about teams evolving from small size to large size. Neil's got a great background having built and helped grow different organizations. We're going to be talking about some of his secret sauce. I'm excited to hear some of the recommendations that he has for others and importance of vision and strategy. And Neil, thanks for being on. I'm excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Amir.
Absolutely. So let's start at the top. I guess two things. Let everyone know what TuneCore does. And then obviously as a CTO, I think everyone has a good idea what your responsibilities are, but just give us a snapshot of what you do, what you're responsible for, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So TuneCore is essentially a platform that allows artists or music labels to distribute their music to the hundreds of music streaming services that are out there and essentially collect the revenues back due to those artists. We also do music publishing, and we help artists make money there, and a number of other artist services. So it's been around since 2005. So it's been around for a while. It's very trusted. We've got everybody who's making their music in their basement, just celebrities, and like I said, the labels. My responsibility here has been really overseeing all of the website and feature development and product development that goes into that, as well as office IT and you name it. Pretty standard feel for most CTO roles.
Gotcha. Awesome. Now excited. I mean, I know you guys have been around for a while, and you've been a part of different parts of growth. So excited to kind of talk about the evolution of a small team to a larger team. I guess before we start, maybe just a good idea at a high level to understand kind of what engineering looks like at a high level, just, how you guys are currently organized, and then we'll kind of dive in from there.
Sure. So I've been here about 4 years, and now we have agile. We have 2-week sprints. We have a squad structure, which a lot of people have talked about in your previous podcast. And my contribution here was to introduce all of that. When I started here, it was about 6 or so developers. We had 1 QA and 1 IT tech person. Now we have about 65 people in various chapters or disciplines of QA, DevOps, IT, engineering, and release management. And really the focus is on process, implementation, and quality towards these products and features that we deliver to our customer.
Awesome. Curious, how big is the engineering team?
Out of that 65, I'm going to guess 40.
Oh, that's nice size. All right. And I guess in terms of wanting to talk about when a small team needs to grow and evolve into a larger team, some of the pitfalls, challenges, some of the signs of needing to make that shift. I guess maybe we could take a step back and talk about when the team was smaller and kind of some of the challenges that were there that kind of precipitated the planning to account for the team to grow and kind of what processes look like maybe a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So when the team size was 6, I think there's obviously a startup element to it where things are unstructured. You have to move fast. So you assemble project teams and they work on things, they get them out the door, and then they move on to the next project, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think everyone's experience in tech as a manager or leader, you have different organizational experiences. You either start off with a small team, which I did. You start off with a large team with our established processes. You might start off with no team. You may own the entire tech organization. Here, I own the entire tech organization. And in other cases, people might be limited to a small slice of the pie. And in cases where there are people who might enter an organization and the stakeholders are very tech savvy, or you might have stakeholders who stare into the wilderness when you mention HTML, right? So, TuneCore, I think, is a little bit more on the tech savvier side. I think at the time when I joined, it was a little bit more of the deer in the headlights view when I joined, but leadership has changed. And I think we're definitely a little bit more on the technical side now, which is great. And I think the other thing that might come into play is you might enter a company with a lot of legacy tech and tech debt, or you might build from scratch, right? So I came here, there's a lot of legacy tech. And because of the team size, there were just a lot of bugs and things like that. They just didn't have time to get to everything. And that's essentially what I started with.
I mean, obviously, starting with a team of 6 and now, the size you're at some point you start forward thinking and start envisioning, hey, if I had a bigger team, I'd tackle these things, and start to build out your roadmap and start fleshing out what your vision's going to be, your strategy. How soon did you start looking at that? Was it early on? Was it, hey, I need to still ship product no matter what? That's first and foremost. We'll get to some of that once I can.
Yeah. So I think that anytime you join a company, you have to kind of figure out what the heck is going on, who's who are the people you talk to, who's going to help you kind of move things along. And when I joined here, it was probably about 3 to 4 months as I was starting to get an idea of, all right, this is what needs to happen here. And this is the plan I need to put in place to get there. And at the same time, you're still trying to drive your tactical projects and ship stuff out the door. But meanwhile, you're living in chaos and fire and whatnot. And as you know, I'm a big believer in squads, or some companies call them pods, chapters, guilds, all that stuff. And interestingly enough, that came out of the music industry. So Spotify having originated all of that. So, definitely a close parallel to where I am. And for people who don't know what that is and they're just listening to this first time, that's really a difference from project-based teams, which kind of assemble and then get their thing done and then disassemble. And this is really just matrix functional teams that are focused on fixed scope. And the thing I like about this was it really builds an expertise around certain things, and the team itself develops a working cadence with what they have. And I've listened to your other podcast. I think somebody mentioned, hey, that creates a walled garden, and it can, be a little bit scrappier and faster not to do that. But I think it can also result in a lot of tech debt, and obviously that product expertise is there. So the first thing I was trying to figure out, I think when I got here, was how do you create those functional teams, and what would that look like here at TuneCore to best address it? And with a team of 6, you can't start creating squads because you only have 6 people to work with. And so, that was the main impetus, is figuring out where do I want this end state of the organization to be, and how can I divide the team to get there? And you can't do it alone, because you have to have, I think, those cross-functional teams. Sometimes you need the representation of the stakeholder, which is usually a product team. And so you have to kind of work with whoever you've got to kind of buy into that organizational idea. And so that's what I started with, at least the starting point of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have 6 people trying to emulate, a model that might require, several more people, obviously multiples of that, to execute, to deliver. When you're starting to kind of sit down with stakeholders, you're figuring things out, you're trying to build out your roadmap and planning. The business obviously is trying to grow fast. I was just curious, how much of the relationship with product at that size, obviously going back to the team size of 6, how dynamic was that relationship? Obviously, you guys are a small team delivering a lot. Product is coming up with more ideas, more of their roadmap than you guys can deliver, because obviously there's a lag.
Obviously, you have to have a partner. And as I mentioned, product is that. And this will probably go into later conversation about strategy and vision. But if you can tell them where you want to get to and what the promise is, and how you can improve delivery and get them the final picture, a lot of that is a lot of upfront selling to the C-level executives, to your product counterparts, and making sure they're on board, and really just demonstrating, hey, if we can do these small samples, we can actually get these benefits of expertise. You can actually get an focused improvement in that particular part of the product. And I think that's the main thing. You just have to have a really good sales pitch and show them where you can get with a change in structure.
No, absolutely. That's very valid. And you touched on vision and strategies, just kind of curious. And we kind of touched on, you mentioned stakeholders' level of technical sophistication, how much code's there, how much is not, the impact on vision and strategy. I guess in the early days, how much time or how often were you re-examining vision? Was it a quarterly thing, twice a year thing, annual thing?
To be honest, I think you start off with a core. If you start off with a foundation, right? From an architectural standpoint, you might identify, hey, this, like TuneCore, for example, is a monolithic application when I first got here. And automatically the next stage of that is obviously a microservice or, architecture or whatnot. And based on our own individual experiences, we might say that microservice platform is the next step, introducing CDNs and single page applications. A lot of what you bring to the table as an engineer is understanding, hey, from this experience, I can see how this fits in this model. How do I go from this monolith to the larger picture? And that's also, I think, something that a lot of companies and engineering leaders do. I don't think what I've done here, moving from a monolith to a microservice model, is any different from what a lot of people do. But trying to figure out how to get there, you can establish kind of a base without a lot of detail. And then as you start fleshing things out, I've had this one ongoing presentation, which slowly filled in the details as time went on. And eventually you get to this larger picture, which, you just keep reusing it, and that becomes your strategy and vision, right?
That makes sense. No, absolutely. And I guess as you're, fast forwarding, teams starting to get bigger, you're able to kind of now organize around the squads you're trying to, establish, companies adding headcount. When you're kind of now able to kind of look at some of that stuff and you're kind of, given some more resources and you can execute past the 6-person team you had, how does your view of those teams start evolving? How quickly were you trying to, hey, I know exactly what I want from my team, or more or less, was it, I'm going to grow into what I'm hoping for and I just have to kind of be patient as we kind of get to that point?
It was definitely more of the latter, where you have to grow into it. So I often use this analogy, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with biology, but there's a concept of meiosis, mitosis, of cellular generation. So as you can fill your teams with more hires, you reach a capacity, and then you can split those cells into their various parts, and the mitochondria is split and all that. So my approach here has been seeing, hey, this is where I can see our functional teams splitting into. And as an example, when I started these squad structures here, we had kind of an account management team, which managed incoming payments, outgoing payments, things like that. And there just weren't enough people to break it out. And over time, we started hiring and things like that, and started then saying, all right, now we've got a team for incoming payments. Now we've got a team for outgoing payments. And really, that was kind of the approach, is seeing where do we minimize the roadmap with the existing team that we have to kind of accomplish what we need to get done, and then wait for that next stage and prioritize everything else later. I think that's been generally the approach. So it's very much a, see the forest beyond the trees mentality, I think.
I guess that obviously makes a lot of sense. And when you're trying to hire, I guess sometimes you have choices of, finding people that are making that immediate impact that you need now versus, I know this person's going to grow into this particular role. Obviously, you're balancing the team's needs. Like when you're looking at team growth and kind of having them scale from a smaller to larger team, was your hiring strategy shifting at all in terms of the type of people that you could bring in or you wanted to bring in?
So my hiring strategy was evolving, I would say. I think my first couple of months here, I found hiring was very difficult. And generally because of the market, maybe TuneCore hadn't really done that competitive analysis at the time of, hey, what is a software developer salary? Like, what is actually out there? I think for some reason, initially they may have made up whatever they had. And I think the first strategy I would recommend to anybody out there is looking at team augmentation. And if you need to get a project done, outsourcing definitely, as long as you've got the budget to do that. But over time, we really started off with engineers out of boot camps. This might have been their first job. They had relatively little, enterprise, larger experience. I think we're slowly shifting to and this continues today, where we're bringing people who've done this before, who've seen that, who are bringing some knowledge to the table, right? So I think your hiring goals have shifted because you don't want this to become a playground where, hey, this is the first time I've done this and I'm going to experiment. And, it's not the best solution because they've never seen the hurdles of that. And that's where I come in, or engineering managers come in, or whoever, say, yeah, we actually have done this before and it's probably not the best way to go. So definitely more on the experience side is where we're filling gaps now.
That makes sense. Especially if you have a lot of, mid-level people, obviously you only have so many people who can architect and be principal engineers to oversee. I guess as you're kind of thinking past where you're at now and kind of using your 4 years of experience with the company and starting to think, the next phase and the further growth, when you're now forecasting ahead, are you re-examining team structure, or are you pretty comfortable? Hey, I think I found my, team formula I like, and I'm just going to try to expand it at this point. Will there be a time where you go back and, recheck where you're at with that?
Yeah, I think so. This is, again, also will speak to what my strategy vision is. I think with a lot of companies, this might not deviate from what most people have to do. At a high level, I focused on stabilization, right? And identifying whatever goals had to be in there. Then really it's about the evolution, right? To monolith to microservices. How are we going to get there? And then the next stage is innovation. I think everything I've done in terms of team structure and definition has really been around, hey, how do we meet these first two goals, right? If we want to get stabilization done, I think the current team structure that we have is going to meet that. And I think we're still moving to this stage of where we are building out teams which are meeting that evolutionary goal, right? And that, as an example, right now I have a squad that focuses on publishing, and it's currently in the pre-meiosis state or mitosis state, and is mixed with what we call our trust and safety squad, right? And their scope is very integrated. And until they get to that capacity where they split, they're still aiming to get focus on this evolutionary strategy or point of strategy that I have. There's going to be this point where we focus on innovation as a strategy. And that's where you might have a team that suddenly comes out of the blue for machine learning or, other things. So I think whatever needs you have, that will also slowly expand and modify the squad structure.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously that, like you mentioned, your team is kind of incubating with the other team until they're ready to stand on their own and their own, squad, and they can actually function. I guess one thing I want to touch on is if you were to kind of, we've talked about vision and strategy. I kind of am interested in hearing the process that you go through and kind of, as you're going through, looking at the vision, obviously, the strategy, you're very thoughtful in the process as you've been describing it thus far, but kind of maybe talk us through the actual process that you sit down, you go through.
Sure. So I think a lot of companies or tech teams can get caught up in the tactical day-to-day priorities, and in essence, they're just reactionary. And what's often lacking is where do we want to get to? Obviously, that means strategy and vision. And so I think what the underlying driving force in our tactical actions are really things that we want to get to the longer term picture. And this goes into a little personal background, but I once lived in an apartment with really bad floors. It was a rent stabilized apartment, and the floors were awful, but the landlord would not work on it. So what I did is I took a 3x3 section of this. It was a 1,600 square foot apartment for New York. That's pretty good. But a 3x3 section of the floor, and I sanded it down and I stained it and, blah, blah, blah. And I did this over a course of maybe 3 to 4 months. Every day I took a 3x3 section, and eventually got to this point where the whole floor was redone, right? So very much that's the same approach I've had from how am I going to get this vision done? And, wherever you're working on a project, you might say, hey, there's an opportunity here to piggyback, and we can probably eliminate some tech debt. We can probably introduce this new feature. As an example, if your business has come up with this one-off custom deal, you as a tech team in a normal day-to-day might just say, all right, let's just build something to get that deal done, and that's it. My philosophy would, in terms of this larger vision, would be you should be designing and architecting to build flexibility for the next custom deal that might be coming in for that similar bounds. Ideally, this custom deal is part of a larger strategy that the business is building towards. Or you might be saying, hey, maybe this custom work that we're doing here is solving some other repeatable problem with this custom solution that's actually part of our larger vision and goals that we're trying to achieve, right? And you want to avoid ending up with throwaway code that can't be repurposed. So my goal has been sometimes piggybacking into the existing work and making these baby steps to get that whole floor redone.
Great analogy. I mean, first of all, kudos to you to actually go through with it. It sounds like a little bit of work, but you needed the floor to...
I needed the floor to be done, yes.
The floor to be done. I like it. I like the idea of piggybacking new features into existing work because obviously, it gives you an opportunity to also expand the capabilities of a team potentially and kind of start helping, formulate what a new squad would be if that is something that the company will functionally need to break off on its own. I guess when you're kind of looking at, similarly, like when you're trying to implement, so I guess, on one hand, it's the vision strategy is great. When you want to communicate that to your managers, to the team, maybe talk about that. Because I think the one thing that's kind of as difficult as establishing the vision is how do you articulate that so everyone actually buys in and understands what you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, so I think as the team is growing, obviously there's a lot of new people who don't understand why you're going the direction you're going, right? And I think, I can't remember where this quote comes from, but I think it was, those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. So what I personally do, at least for new people, is I actually give them a history of where we were and why we're trying to move to this new state. So obviously I've been here for 4 years. I'm still trying to get this full strategy accomplished. And every new person that comes on kind of sees like the broad strokes, but they don't remember the original problems that we're trying to move away from. So I do a one-on-one with every new person that joins the team and tell them a little bit about the history and where our current model and architecture and system is trying to solve and move us away from and get to this final state. So already that's the first selling point, is that making people aware of the past so they know why the future is there. And then I think the last part, I think with even that onboarding process, is that we document everything, right? So people can see like all sorts of issues we're normally encountering. I think even within the squads, I have our engineering managers now working on presentations there to get them to understand why we're working towards these end states and how the existing processes work. With executive management, I think if I had to rephrase, how do you keep them in line with that? Even for them, I have a presentation, which I've walked through why. For the most part, my executive management is aware. They were here before me, so they were aware of all the problems that existed before. So it's not a difficult sell to say, hey, this is where we need to get to. I think tying their objectives to what I'm trying to promise is really the key point. So let's say we need to improve performance for the site, right? Telling them what benefits of performance come from the new architecture and whatnot, really tying that together, product delivery, I think everyone can buy into faster product delivery. So telling those type of ideas are how you keep people in tune. I might have departed from the original question, but I'm not even sure.
No. I think you actually did a great job. I think you talked about providing some of the historical basis and the documentation to help somebody actually in the onboarding process, helping them understand why the vision is being executed. I think that's actually really important. I think it's not talked about enough, because when you're jumping on the speeding train, a lot of times you'd have no idea where it's coming from. And you're trying to figure out, well, why are we doing all this stuff? It makes no sense. And some people are going to spend a lot of brain cycles trying to figure out, well, this makes no sense. You're going to get some challenges of, well, have you thought about this? Why are we doing this? And I think a lot of times what you're talking about, the historical perspective, is like, listen, you're probably going to go through this whole process mentally of trying to figure out why in God's name we do things the way we do, but there is some reasons, and this probably helps you get there. So I think that's some phenomenal insight. I was going to ask you, cognizant of our time, I wanted to touch on as well. I know you kind of have shared some of the secret sauce. I think some of the points you've made, are really excellent when it comes to helping your team scale from a smaller to larger size. But I just wanted to see, when it comes to some of the organizational approach, if there were things that you have experienced that you'd like to touch on that kind of would help maybe others who are sitting down now going through that small to large phase themselves.
So, as I said, everyone has their own experience. So you have to kind of see where this fits in. So let's say you've joined a company and you only have this island of control. You might only be able to accomplish a portion of this, right? So I think The first easy one is if you're having a squad structure and you're not just 6 developers being scrappy, obviously having each team have autonomy and giving them trust to manage themselves. I think that's number one important thing. Not necessarily a secret sauce element, but common sense, transparency with stakeholders. I think this is kind of coming out of agile, right? Like the idea of 2-week sprints, trying to present to the stakeholder, not another common sense one. I think the one thing I've introduced here that I feel is unique is that I know one of your previous podcasts mentioned that walled garden again, right? And I feel my squad structure essentially has an engineering manager, has a lead, a couple engineers, has a QA person, and it has a product subset. And I view the lead engineer as somebody who's kind of an internal interface, like in Java, right? You have an interface, and they're really focused on, making the code quality good and all that. And then the other side of it is the engineering manager, who's really kind of the external interface. So as long as you have those systems and processes in place to allow that engineering manager communicate out to other engineering managers and say, hey, these are issues we're having, or this is what we're working on. Is this something anybody else has done before? And you can bring in, hey, we've done this before. You can get that external squad input. Each of these squads, the engineering management and the project management actually part, also do their own stand up to kind of do that external communication. I think that's kind of a secret sauce element here, because otherwise you do end up in that siloed walled garden where, hey, we're going to do something here. Oh, that other team's already done it, but we didn't know. So there's that. I think the other secret sauce item that I brought here, and this is coming from my prior experience at Viacom, where the directors were equivalent to the managers here, where they were in charge of the squads, but they spent a majority of their time really just managing deployments and Git, processes. And then there was a PMO group, which was always asking for status and, hey, has this code been deployed? And it was really a mismatch of like, hey, why is an engineering manager focusing on this, right? So what I've done here, because I do control the whole org, and maybe if somebody's listening and they say, hey, I can work with my project management equivalent here, I can get this done. But I've combined project management and release management here. So for the most part, we have a great head of program management here. Her name's Holly. She runs a team of release managers, and they're sitting in 1 or 2 squads. They're managing project plans, but they're also managing, hey, I'm going to manage these code deployments. And they don't always come in with the technical know-how or skills, but we train them up. And they manage the code deployments. They manage the Git merges. So engineering managers or directors are kind of spending their time more on system design or like managing the team, and less about, oh, we had this code merge or code deployment issue. And I think that is another element which I haven't really seen in other companies. I think I would definitely recommend it because it creates some ownership in the project management group. I would never put this group as part of the PMO, but because they're really hands-on and understanding how the repositories work, they know, hey, now the project management group now knows when this ticket has been deployed. They know actually what's going on. They have a little bit more of a stake in the game. So I think that's the other secret sauce. The other just small things I would mention, positive culture, self-explanatory, constantly adapting and learning from your mistakes, avoiding blame, open internal communication. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I don't know how this works. And also product and tech, we were talking about, before, is like, you really want to have a collaborative relationship. And actually, this is one last secret sauce element for the sake of time, is that I always reference a 3-legged stool here. So every squad has 3 owners who are trying to drive the quality of the squad ahead. One is product, right? One is the engineering manager, and one is our release manager. So you have one representation of the product requirements owning, the deliverable of the squad, the engineering manager owning the quality and making sure the sustainability of what's happening is owned by the squad. And you have the release manager, the / project manager, kind of driving the timelines and making sure that the team is coordinated and meeting whatever they need to do. And all 3 of them own, the squad moving forward. The developers obviously own, hey, we got to build this thing, but those are the ones, driving the squad together, like as their little mini company within TuneCore, at least.
No, that's phenomenal. Those are some really great tips. I was going to ask you one follow-up just to provide maybe some context to somebody, because obviously you mentioned combining project management, release management. They're obviously interfacing with, different stakeholders, different allocation of time. How do they allocate their time? Because obviously that's a very defined, specific, part of the process. But how do they allocate time to make sure that they're not spread thin?
Yeah, so I think the other thing we've pushed for here is that the technology project management, release management group is really just focused within our group, right? They don't have to deal with the stakeholders as much. I think product actually owns that engagement with stakeholders. I mean, we obviously tell stakeholders when tickets are deployed, and that's what our release management team does. We actually also have a centralized PMO group, which owns the larger project initiatives that are just outside of technology, right? Let's say a project has to work with customer finance or marketing, and they have deliverables that they have to do. That project management PMO role is actually managing timelines and things that span the organization. And this one is just within the island of squads and the technology group and product group. So it does kind of just give them a subset and gives them the bandwidth to just focus on, code deployments and things like that.
Super cool, man. I think this has been a great episode. I think you've provided some great insight, tips. Hopefully other people will appreciate it. I was going to ask you, if somebody does want to pick up from something you mentioned on the episode, what's a good way of reaching out to you? Twitter, LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's pretty good. I think I check that every now and then, so I think that's a good way to go. I would say TuneCore is also hiring, right? So if you want to experience what we've built here, I think we've had a very high positivity rate of employment here. So, and we just reopened our offices, which where I'm at right now. So definitely check TuneCore out as well from a career perspective.
Absolutely. We'll make sure to include your LinkedIn, and somebody can connect with you and hopefully explore not only what you said, but if they're interested in being a part of the culture. Sounds like an exciting place. They can reach out to you. Neil, thanks for being on. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for your time as well. And I really enjoyed myself here.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, I always ask for two things. One, if you did find the episode useful, share it with somebody else who might like it. That's how we've been growing, and I appreciate everyone who does. And secondly, hit me up on LinkedIn if you want me to talk about a specific topic. I'll definitely do my best to find a guest to address that. Until next time, goodbye.